Right. Okay. It's just gone 11, so I think we'll make a start with this morning's session. First thing, just a little bit of etiquette. Can everybody make sure that your microphones are muted during the presentation, just so that we don't have any, interruption and feedback as we go through Alistair's slides. Right. So just moving on to the agenda for today. I think we're going to get the next slide. Here we go. So we've got an hour this morning. First of all, I would like to introduce Alistair Clark. I'm delighted that he's here to present again today for us. Alistair works with Weaver Technical Solutions. He's enjoyed a very long career in product development, project leadership and management in medical devices and combination products at Sanofi, Aventis, Pfizer and Teva. So he's very well experienced in implementing GMP. He's been working very closely with the Atlantic KET Med Project to develop a GMP quality system for the delivery of technical support to companies within a GMP framework. And these are primarily the companies that the project has been working with directly. But today he will introduce the key concepts and the requirements that you need to consider from the outset if you're thinking of implementing a GMP system yourself. If you could please enter any questions into the chat function as we go along. And following the presentation, we will do some polls and there'll be a Q&A session at the end where questions will be answered. The training materials will be available online at BioNow later today. Okay, so next slide, please. A little bit about the Atlantic KET Med Project. Atlantic KET Med is funded by the Interreg Atlantic area. It's sort of underwritten by ERDF. It's part of the EU, technical delivery sort of projects. And it's establishing a transnational advanced pilot manufacturing ecosystem for future biomedical products. And as part of that, the project is working very closely with 25 SMEs, so 5 in each country basically, to deliver technical support within a GMP quality management system. So you can see a little map on the right where you've got the Atlantic area is shown in blue. So you've got Portugal, northern Spain, you've got the west coast of France, and then you've got the UK and Ireland as well. There's more details at the Atlantic KET Med website, which is at the bottom there. So I suggest you look at that after today's session. So without any further ado, we'll hand over to Alistair and he'll take us through the things you need to consider and key concepts and requirements for implementing GMP.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the seminar today. And first, I should actually thank BioNow and the new University of Ireland Galway for the opportunity to help them with the development of their GMP system. I find it very interesting working with them and also the wider network as we've actually done that. Hopefully everybody can see my slides. Yeah. I'll take silence as a yes.
We're good, Alistair, we're good.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. The first thing I'll do is actually introduce you to the solution that the Atlantic KET Med team developed. And this was done to facilitate access to the various expertise, equipment and processes that existed within the organization. The goal at the core of the work was to find a way to deliver projects using this infrastructure and expertise that existed, but to do that in a way that observed the need for quality and accommodating partnerships within that wider group, so bringing in external companies. As we've mentioned, if you do have any questions, please do add them to the chat area, and what we'll do is we'll leave some time at the end so that we can actually come back and address those questions. First, the need for quality. Where does that come from? Many industries have quality systems of one form or another, and in many industries are voluntary. But in medtech and pharma, they're mandatory and are indeed regulated at national and regional level. I'll talk a little bit more in detail about what advanced therapy medical products are, and I'll show you a few examples as well as we actually go through this, just to put the quality management system in context. It's a really interesting area. The advanced therapy medicinal products offer a glimpse into the future. And from the small number of products approved in this category, they cover a very broad range of medicinal products, including those whose therapeutic effect is not based on what we'd expect from a pharmaceutical tablet. Indeed, it's a very interesting and exciting area to be working in. This system has been developed from an understanding of the various applicable standards and regulations. And as all systems, it's best applied as early as you possibly can in your product development, and to fully make sure that your product is safe and effective, and also that you will produce the documentary evidence, the records that you will need for your submissions. There are two types of quality system. One that defines every activity prescriptively, a bit like work instructions as is required in GMP. But there is another way, which is to use the education experience of the participating organizations to work at a high level and adapt what needs to be done for each project. And that's the approach that we've adopted here. It does require a different sort of rigor. The system, though, does embody pharma GMP, which is also applied to the advanced therapy products. So by GMP, a really good example of that is the Orange Guide that's produced by HMRC. The last update was actually done in 2017. I also noted recently that they've updated their risk management guide as well last year. And then the medical device QMS standard, which is an ISO standard 13485. If you look across the Atlantic, then that's actually defined by the Code of Federal Regulations that the FDA actually apply. And for the devices, the regulations that apply to the medical device aspect are 21 CFR 820.3. A reminder that we're actually working in quite a specific context, and that the organizational constructs can be different, and the product could be different in each case. And so it is if you actually go to the list of approved advanced therapy medicinal products, you'll actually see a very broad range of products that have actually come to the market. I think we've got up to 17 or 18 so far that have made it through approval. But the basic working principle of the system that's established is to identify any quality gaps in the projects and then define ways to fill those gaps. For those of you who are familiar with doing that at the end of the project in a remediation type way, doing it at the beginning is an excellent way to avoid the difficulties of introducing quality late to your production processes. So moving on to the next slide, those of you who are familiar with quality systems will recognize the quality triangle here. So it's a standard pyramid view. So the basis are the records that are actually created during your projects, and those are based on the very specific process and equipment SOPs and work instructions. And those then follow the access procedures and templates that form the signpost for the Atlantic KET Med projects. And then the quality framework that those are hung on basically consists of the quality manual, policy and objectives that each project may have. And this further speaks to the context of the situation. And the largest box there is the access procedures. And what this does is it shows the channeling of the requirements and against the equipment that exists and the processes that the KETMED team actually have at their disposal. And then it brings them and makes sure that there's appropriate risk management and development, creating the appropriate records that will then eventually lead to a quality release for your material. This slide just adds a little bit more information about what each of those layers within your quality pyramid consist of. So right at the bottom, you've got the pharmaceutical device and the advanced therapy medicinal product records at the bottom. And then above those, you have the processes and equipment specific SOPs and work instructions. And then the core of the system is the access procedure and guideline. And that actually takes you through the definition of what the product is, what the situation is, what the organization is. And then the templates actually ensure that the work content is correct and the appropriate records are created. And then that's driven by the quality manual. And the quality manual is a document based on the 13485 quality manual. And then just putting that in the context of information, this detailed slide actually shows examples of the key records and procedures that would actually govern a medtech pharma and advanced therapy medicinal product project. The procedures are actually shown on the left, and those are just some key high-level ones. For example, facility control, material control, and CAPA. But first, a few words about the regulations. And we'll just look at the landscape and the context of the products we're actually talking about. So the green area lists some medical devices, syringe drivers, pacemakers, even something as simple as a medicinal spoon. The red area actually shows the pharmaceutical part. So we've got a combination product in there, and that can be combined with a combination app, and we also have a drug-eluting stent there. And in the advanced therapy area, which is a relatively new area, then you've actually got the somatic cells, gene therapy, and the tissue engineered medicines, as it's defined in the EMA guidance and regulations. And some regulation history. It started back before the Second World War with the US FD&C Act, and that resulted from a particular a situation, and that's typically what has actually driven the regulations. As something actually happens within the industry, then the regulators actually respond, and we can actually see that right the way down now to the implementation of the medical device regulations and the IVDR as well, just at this point. And that was in response to specific bureaucratic failings within the cosmetic industry. And there was a lot of learning actually taking out for that. The regulations are global. And certainly that slide gives an indication that it's the West that's actually been leading the development of that. But I think it's fair to say that the East is now starting to influence the regulations really quite heavily, with China and India being the predominant API manufacturing countries now. It'll be interesting to see how this situation develops as time goes on. And here we list just the two quality management system and risk management standards that are just currently in the process of being adopted by the FDA as well. And then hopefully this is where you'll get to with your products, which is to the approval process. And again, taking a little bit more wide view on the approval processes, it's really the same but different. And so it is for combination and medicinal products as well. But I just wanted to add this slide to actually see that there is an endpoint, and that endpoint is actually based on the records that are actually created that demonstrate that you've adhered to GMP and that your development has resulted in a safe and effective product. It's all about the evidence. So thinking about GMP, this is mandatory for product used in humans and product used in humans at any stage in the process. So even if you're actually first in man, then there needs to be evidence of a quality management system and GMP at work. It does require an appropriately comprehensive QMS that deals with risk management as well. And I mentioned the HMRC guide that was updated last year. And it must be documented and it must be monitored. And one that's certainly key for the managers is that the quality management review that's actually part of the process, both in the pharmaceutical quality management system and the medical device quality management system. And perhaps the most important aspect of your QMS is that it must be resourced appropriately. So you have to have the people to actually support the QMS in itself, as well as the generation of the procedures and records that are required to actually develop and control your product as it progresses. And indeed, the head of quality often has a direct line through to a company CEO or managing director. And there are legal responsibilities for the license holder, such as having the QP review of product before it's released into the market. Routine management review setting and reviewing the quality objectives applicable to development and marketed product should be an integral part of your quality management system. And this is driven by what you actually see within the GMP guides that exist around the world. There will be a national standard available in most countries. So thinking about this in a little bit more detail and reflecting this against our current situation that we face with the COVID-19 vaccination development. So they've actually had to go through their approval, and then with one of the vaccinations, the supply chain is really quite interesting, and it's actually shown that distribution should also be considered as you're actually developing your product. So there were some limitations with one of the vaccination programs due to the more extreme nature of the supply chain with the very low temperatures that need to be established and maintained. So it shows that that control that you have for your product doesn't really stop at your factory gates. And a really lovely example that exists within the approved advanced therapy medicinal products involves the collection of human tissue and then the processing of that. So it can start even before you've created the material that would actually be going back into the patients for the treatment. All of that falls within the scope of your quality management system to make sure that you've considered and controlled what you need to. Training also is an essential part of any manufacturing activities, and having evidence that staff are trained and that the training itself is effective is really important. So the aspect of control when things go wrong is also key. Identifying non-conforming product, what's causing the issue or the problem, and what needs to be done to stop it happening again is key. And the evidence that the changes are effective and don't impact the safety of your process or product are core to the product you're making. Material and product traceability is required, and as time goes on, the need for this traceability extends into the marketplace as well. Having an effective vigilance process is key, and this responsibility remains for the time that your products actually stay in the market. And we've actually seen that with the addition of the post-market follow-up as it's defined in the new European regulations for medical devices and IVDs. And this slide is just a summary of the legal responsibility that comes with a manufacturing license or an importation authorization. Is your material crossing borders? You will certainly need a QMS and to be following it to do this. So I think it's clear why a QMS is required. And for the Atlantic KET Med projects, the quality framework that's been established prompts the forethought and risk assessment. It creates a definition that will allow to a design transfer of the product into controlled production, even within the clinical setting that's required. The control itself, the identification of the attributes and parameters and the performance requirements, even down to the critical dimensions that actually control the functionality of your product. Quality, establishing the continuous improvement environment within your project. So working out what went wrong, building that into management reviews within your project. And then by far and away, the most important thing are the records. And I work with a client whose background is actually the banking industry. And he has a lovely view of records in that they should actually match the integrity of your bank statement so that they're accurate and they're immutable and so can't be changed. But of course, we know that if we find errors, then of course what we do is we don't change that document. We go through a change control process to actually demonstrate that we've actually got control of that. So thank you very much for listening to this brief presentation. And what I'll do now is I'll hand over to Diane to see if we have any questions, and I'll see what I can do to answer those. And if there aren't any, then we'll go straight into the poll.
Hi, I can't see any questions in the chat. Has anybody got a question now? There'll be another chance in a little while.
Edward, I think you're trying to ask a question, but you're on mute.
Diane, we're a small company in North Wales and 4 employees and some part-time employees. How small has Alistair worked with? How small are the companies that he's worked with? Is that a reasonable size for us to work together?
Absolutely. One of my clients is basically himself. So he wears many hats. That's one of the aspects of quality management systems, that they really do need to be shaped for your current situation. Increasingly common now, even for large companies, to delegate responsibility for manufacturing. So the growth of CMOs, even for the production of pharmaceuticals, has been very strong over the past few years. So the size of your company isn't necessarily an impediment. And it's one of those things that it's good to consider up front in terms of shaping your quality system for your product and also your company. So I think it's entirely appropriate to be thinking of a quality management system. So it could vary from anything from half a dozen SOPs right the way through to, if you do have products in the market, to a more comprehensive system, with 20 or 30 SOPs.
Just a follow-up question. The company is involved both in devices for the health industry and the animal health industry, and also in the future in therapy, designing drugs or vaccines for that whole area. can we develop a standard quality system for both, in just one system that'll cover both? Is that feasible?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually the essence of the system that's been developed for the KETMED projects, is because you've got so many disparate types of products. So I think it's a great question, but I think it's good to have within a company to have one quality system that people work to, even though you may have a different focus in different areas. It just makes the maintenance and the management review of that a little bit more simple.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We've got another question in the chat from Esther Montero. She's asking for infectious diseases, point of care tests, that sort of thing. Are there any specific regulations to consider?
Oh, that's a great question. There are lots of specific regulations, and that's one of the jobs that should be done very early in a project is to actually look not just for the regulations but also for the standards, so that you can identify those. And it's good to approach that through your standard agencies as well, and also through your local regulator, so that effectively you inform yourself and then you check that you've actually identified all those regulations. The health authorities do tend to be very helpful. I've certainly found that in the past. And if you're actually dealing with a different part of the world, then often you can actually find local help to make sure that you're not missing any key regulations or standards.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. There's no more questions at this point. So maybe if we move on to the next bit, the polls. So if everybody could just put your indications on your screen, that you should be able to see the window now. There's only 6 questions, so it just gives us a bit of an idea of you know, the makeup of this audience today. We'll give you a minute or two to have a little think and complete these.
And Mark's asked another question, which we'll come back to.
Right, we've got another half minute or so. We're about halfway through gathering the poll responses.
In that half minute, Diana can answer Mark's question. So he's asking for his organisation. They are already operating an advanced ISO 9001 system as they work in the nuclear industry, providing bespoke products and services. And they're looking for new opportunities in pharma. And it sounds on the surface of it that we can comply with GMP. But how do we find out for sure? I mean, 13485 is fundamentally based on 9001, so you've got a really good platform on which to add those additional controls that you might need within your quality management system. And the best way to do that is actually just undertake a gap analysis. So there are quite a few resources and people out there who can actually help do that. If you're not familiar with 13485, and just conducting that gap analysis, and then you'll be able to identify what you would actually have to do to step up to that. And of course, there are some certification organisations that can then come in and, as you've done for your 9001 certification, get that approved and certified for 13485 as well.
Great, thanks, Alistair. Right, has everybody finished the polls? I think we've got probably most of the answers we're going to get. So maybe we could have a look at those and see what they tell us. Okay, I'll start with just reflecting on what we've got here. You can see that the people on the audience are predominantly research and development, basically, 65% of you, and some of you are some of each of that, so maybe a little bit of manufacturing mixed in. It's not surprising to me that you would be at the R&D end of things, because if you're manufacturing already, then I guess you've got to have a system in place. Right, the acid test. Does your work environment follow procedures? Always. Nope, that's a good honest answer. 50% of you. Sometimes, and never. Maybe the never people are in a sort of job where, you know, procedures aren't really part of it.
Absolutely. It's interesting, Diane, the FDA view on product development is that there's a front end bit which can and perhaps should be unregulated, if you like, but then there's a point when you know what the product is. That's really when the SOPs really need to kick in, so that you're actually developing the product under SOP control.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think our general advice would be is you start that probably a little bit earlier, sort of in the R&D phase, so that you're building your records and your design history file and all those things, and you don't have to do any rework because you've got the audit trail, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Moving down the poll, 60% of you are saying that your organization already has a quality management system. And 40% not. And also, it looks like, again, that 60% are thinking of implementing a QMS in the next 12 months. So that's good. I hope this information here is timely for you. And then there's one for Alistair here. Bit of a spread here, Alistair, on the ATMP projects.
Yeah, that's actually really quite exciting. 25% of the people online working on advanced therapy products already. So that's very, very exciting. And another big group actually planning to do that. I think it's fair to say, though, the presentation is, I mean, it's as the landscape slide actually showed, the quality management is expected in all aspects of developing products for humans, for human use. So I think that's really interesting, exciting.
A sign of the times, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
So last question then, with regard to quality and regulatory requirements, about a third of you feel that you have a good understanding. About 2/3 of you felt that you had little knowledge or understanding, and hopefully we've tried to address some of that today. And there will be a lot more, further resources that you can tap into, which I'll come on to later. And nobody has a complete understanding. Maybe Alistair does, but nobody else on this call does. So that's probably.
I submitted my poll answers as well, so I don't have a complete understanding of the regulations. I think it's an impossible ask, but per the question that was asked earlier by Edward, I think it is important to create that quality management system, and as you do that, that will certainly take you down the road to a much better understanding of what's required. Even if you're a very small organization, I think that's a really important aspect of what your work should be.
Great, that's I think that's the end of the polls. We've got another question has come in, and then we can take further questions from the group. Sonia is asking, are there any ballpark figures as to the cost for CE marking and FDA approval, and the length of time to get approval for a point of care diagnostic, or is it entirely dependent on a case-by-case basis?
For point of care diagnostic, and from a CE marking perspective, there are different classifications, but in terms of the actual approval cost itself, there is a limit to that. But what you would actually have to do to actually generate the information, the records, for the technical file that would be submitted to the notified body, could be very different, just depending on, is it new, are there analytes that you can point to in the past? So from that perspective, I think it depends. But the core approval costs tend to be very similar. So if you're budgeting, then from a CE marking perspective, doing that for something between £10,000 and £20,000 should be possible. For the FDA, they've actually got a really quite a nice site where they actually list out the fees that go with each of the approval processes. In terms of medical device and diagnostics, it'll either be a 510K and the costs there are lower, or a de novo approach. And then there are other options in terms of that. And the good thing about paying the fees now with the FDA is that they're required to hold their approval times if you provide all of the appropriate information. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of a feel. It's not, I mean, the fee scales are similar on both sides of the Atlantic, but it's well worth doing just that initial evaluation of what classification the product is to make sure that the development costs are appropriately budgeted for as well. And I see that Neil's asking a question about electronic QMSs.
Yes. My apologies, Alistair. I've had to go out whilst this presentation's been on. So I've been listening to the presentation, but I haven't been able to look at any of the slides. So I might have missed some of the detail. I'm making an assumption that the system that you're talking about is based around documentation and paper documentation at this stage, rather than electronic management QMS. Is that correct?
Yes, effectively. But that shouldn't put anybody off from thinking about an electronic QMS. And there are systems that you can actually drop into companies to control them. There are a number of those systems out there. Just a couple. I mean, I don't promote any, but Greenlight, Guru, Master Control, Doors, and then I mean, somebody mentioned working in the nuclear industry. There are other documentation control providers as well, and there are different ways of actually setting it up.
Yeah, well, cards on the table. I am a provider of technology services, so yeah, Master Control is a product that we support, not in the UK, but in Asia and the rest of the world. We're just looking at a new electronic electronic quality management service to support from the UK that is really flexible and really low cost and really easy to sort of grow. So, you know, if anybody's interested, then reach out to me and I can talk to them about that. But yeah, no, that was really just to understand, you know, where you were in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. The concern that a lot of organizations have is that, and one of the reasons why we've actually chosen to go down the paper route is that sometimes whenever you're working in consortiums or working across company borders, there can be limits to that in terms of the control from that perspective. The key, as you'll know, is the ability to actually demonstrate the control of the product, so that if you do have information that's required either during a manufacturing inspection here in the UK, or maybe the FDA come to see you because they're really interested in your product, is actually making sure that information there and it's valid.
Thank you.
Yeah, it all comes back to records, doesn't it? Record keeping to track all the changes, you know, even quite small changes, they've got to be tracked. So it does require that sort of document control and change control discipline. Absolutely key.
One of the topics I didn't talk about this morning, but in some of the more in-depth training that we do, is talk about the trace matrix. The FDA really focused quite heavily on that, and that's a document that often it's very helpful to have in an electronic form. Most companies that I deal with do this in a paper format, and that's where something like Master Control or Greenlight Guru is very good, because it links in that systems engineering way the needs to the requirements, to the performance specification, to the risk, and then on to the verification and validation evidence that's required to actually demonstrate that the product's been developed appropriately. So those electronic tools can be really quite helpful in actually doing that.
Great. Has anybody else got any questions? If you want to ask to the group, just unmute and we'll bring you in. There aren't any more questions in the chat either at this stage. We've given you quite a lot to think about, so I'm sure questions will arise afterwards. So, you know, do feel, you know, confident to pass them through to, you know, to myself and Alistair, and we can answer those offline. I've just got a couple more slides just to sort of wrap this event up. So really just some takeaway messages. I think we all understand this, but I'll say it anyway. You know, implementing a GMP quality system is challenging, and you know, you need to be committed to it. But it is a legal requirement when making medical products for human use. So you're going to have to crack that nut at some time. So therefore, it's better to get started early so that your company begins thinking and acting in a GMP compliant manner. You know, it's the sort of general behaviours and expectations, you know, within your R&D staff and your workforce. It gets that going. Now, the Atlantic KET Med quality system has done all the heavy lifting in terms of delivering a ready-to-use GMP QMS for the SMEs that are within the project. And the system will be a public deliverable at the end of the project. So in the next few months, I mean, you know, certainly by the end of this year, it will be, you know, a public deliverable. And at that point, it could be there for you to tap into. Now, for further recorded webinars, including more in-depth information about the quality management system, if you visit that link there, atlanticketmed.eu/events, there are 2 other webinars that you can view, as well as you know, you'll get the links to this one as well. and those other webinars go into more detail, and they're the training webinars that we ran for the 25 companies that are part of the project. So that's that one. The last slide I've got is coming up now. So I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today. I've had some nice feedback in the comments, which is great. You've already got links to the delegate area. I'll send you all an email just to remind you of all of that. And a certificate of attendance will be issued to everybody who came today. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for being part of this, and good luck with all things quality.